So you mentioned about the Quran and making sure that we're giving it the due attention it definitely deserves, alhamdulillah, right? But say, for example, there is a habit of giving Quran as gifts, mini Qurans, large Qurans, small Qurans, right? So sometimes some households are like we have many in our house, right? So my mom takes it upon herself to open each one up, whether it's mini or big, and do a khatam throughout each one. She says no Quran should go unread. But
Well,
do you have recommendations in navigating that, or is there a harm in leaving a Quran unread, especially if it's a gift and it's on display? Thoughts on that?
mashallah, you just mentioned the recommendation, what your mom does, mashallah, tabarakallah. That's the
Okay.
recommendation. May Allah bless her and
I
increase
just thought
her.
it was her. I just
Look
thought
at
it was
that.
her.
That's amazing, though. That is amazing.
Yes.
Where did your mom learn that meaning? Did your mom
I
ever
asked
formally study in a
No,
madrasa?
no, I just
Exactly.
asked her and she was like she's like
No, this is
it's Allah's
iman.
words.
Allahu Akbar. But this is to me is always so beautiful. What is in the hearts of the believing men and women? Like, where did that come from? Right? What did the Quran do such that it created civilizations and cultures that where these meanings are learned, that by being environments of iman, where that it's she feels that if she brings a mushaf and a copy of the Quran in her house, that it has to be read. That's amazing. These are the meanings that when our children are growing up in these lands that they're missing. This is why we have to strive and to do this. May Allah bless, celebrate, mercy, and everyone else who's striving to spread the teachings of our Prophet. This is what we want to be there. This is what's going to guarantee that this thing doesn't get lost and the baton's not dropped. So that's incredibly beautiful. And that would be the recommendation, is that try it. Now, I say that hypocritically because I'm in my musalla right now. I have several copies up there. So now I have a challenge to do a khatam on each one of those. But the other thing that we can do is to put them in different places of the house. And every time that we can, we don't have to sit down and read a whole juz'at. You can read just a page. And some of the scholars used to like to have different levels of reading. So there's one khatam that we do. We read at a good pace. So that's like the juz' a day. And then there's a khatam that we do where we try to do a khatam a year, right? So a khatam a year, if you're reading roughly 2 pages a day for a khatam a year. And then a khatam of a lifetime, where you're just reading like a few verses at a time. So we can actually have multiple khatams going at the same time, right? One where we just read like a verse or 2 or 3, and we really reflect upon them. Another one where we're just reading like 2 pages in a little bit more detail. And another where we're reading multiple pages a day. So that's another option. But may Allah bless your mother.
Because I don't know where she learned it, and I've asked her, and she just said, "Why would I leave it unread?" So that was her response. So alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khairan. I also want to take a
Beautiful.
moment to just share a couple of comments from the audience. Sister Summer, our wonderful Prophet Celebrate Mercy team,
Or,
says, Assalamu alaikum Ramadan. Mubarak Sheikh Yahya, salams to your family.
um,
And then you have been dropping gems, as always, Sheikh Yahya. All wisdom is knowledge, but not all knowledge is wisdom. Such a profound statement. That's probably going to become a tagline in one of our future videos, inshallah. And then what a treat to hear, Sheikh Rhodus, is a reflection on the last Jummah in Ramadan. We do have time for a couple more questions. May I bring them on screen?
please, absolutely.
Okay, so Sister Zainab asked, is it more beneficial to read directly from the Kitab, or is it just as good to read it from an app or the TV like we do with Celebrate Mercy?
Sure. I would say that it's obviously permissible and good to read the Quran in any form, right? And one of the things that I've learned from my teachers is if we say, like, we have our phones and that you pull up like a Quran app on your phone, is that you should treat the Quran app when it's up on your phone as if it's a mushaf, even though it's a digital screen. So all the rules apply in terms of being in a state of wudu and so forth, and the sanctity of it. When it goes away from the screen, then you can consider it like your phone, right? But if the Quran app is up, I would use the same respect that we have for it as if that it's a physical copy of the Quran. I know there's an inclination for people of our time just to do things that are easier in having it on the phone. So when I travel, I'll be honest with you, even though my teachers, even when they travel, they bring a physical copy of the Quran. And that I even know people who actually that read from handwritten copies of the Quran. Now that might be difficult people at time. This is one in, oh, there's only a few people who actually do that. But that's a very beautiful thing, just because the blessing of it actually being handwritten, even though a lot of the copies that we wrote were actually handwritten and then that copied and printed. But my teachers most of the time read from a physical copy of the Quran. Now, for convenience, when I travel, I will use like an iPad or something like that. So what I would say is that if you can read from a physical copy of the Quran, it's better. The whole experience, the pages, and it being with you, it's better. And I know some people are more electronically inclined. If you incline towards reading like on an app or something like that, because you can bookmark and highlight and things like that, that's fine. I even do that sometimes myself. But I would at very least combine both, right? Where if you're going to use the some form of electronic device to read, but also spend time where you're actually grabbing an entire copy of the Quran and holding it. There's a lot of blessing in that.
Actually, building off of that question, Sheikh, there are some women who tend to, this is an audience question. Some women read the Quran on the phone to bypass the need for wudu, especially during the dhikr week, right? So what are your thoughts on this? You mentioned about opening up the app with wudu with the stated clarity and intention. Is
Yeah.
it wrong for us to be reading the Quran on the phone during this
Yeah.
time?
So my teachers have always taught that. And there might be difference of opinion. I'm just mentioning what I've been taught, is that you should treat the device when the Quran app's open as if that's if that there's actually Quran on the app, right? As if that it is that a mushaf and has the same ruling of it. And then if someone's, for instance, not able to recite Quran for some reason, then I would recommend listening to the Quran, right? Putting it on and then listening to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that that the act of that hearing the Quran is that very good in the instances that you and I cannot recite the Quran. But yeah, I would definitely advise that if someone does not have wudu, is that make sure that they have wudu before that they hold their phone when the Quran app is opened. And one of the ways you can get around that potentially is the same ruling. Excuse me, clogged up here. It's permissible to carry a book of tafsir that has more tafsir than Quran. So the same thing would apply with like translation. So one way around that is to, like, for instance, the Quran app that you have, to open up the translation. And if the translation is more than the words of the Quran, then it's permissible for you to that carry it because of that, right? But still, in terms of touching the verse of the Quran, at least in the Shafi school, is that if you don't have wudu, you don't want to touch a verse of the Quran. So you want to kind of touch around it where the English is and kind of scroll up and down. That's another thing that you can do. You can definitely recite the Quran without having wudu. But in terms of touching a verse or carrying a mushaf, I would recommend what was said.
Sheikh, I think we're in a rabbit hole now, so a couple more questions around this, if that's okay. Um, Someone is asking, is there a dua we can say to beg Allah to make it easy for us to become a hafiz after numerous attempts to take classes, but family emergencies and dynamics get in the way?
MashaAllah. So the number one thing is that make the intention to become a hafiz, and that die with that intention, even if you don't achieve your goal here in this world. And the bounty of Allah Ta'ala is great. Is that it is possible that Allah Ta'ala could give you the reward for being a hafiz if you die with the intention and do what it is that you can here in this world. And even if you fall short, Allah Ta'ala is all powerful and can give you the reward for that not achieving your goal. And especially if that you have health issues get in the way, or various other types of family emergencies or anything of this sort. But one of our teachers recommended to better your recitation is to repeat 7 times before you recite, سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى. سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى. So نقرئك فلا تنسى from Surah Al-A'la. You repeat this 7 times, and this will be a means of helping you remember, inshallah ta'ala.
And then we have more questions. Is it sinful for the individual? This one's anonymous. Is it sinful for the individual who keeps getting unwelcome negative thoughts about Allah? What can be done to stop these thoughts, inshallah?
MashaAllah. Allah bless you and protect you, inshallah ta'ala. And human beings um, are susceptible to having all different types of thoughts, and sometimes the very worst of thoughts. In fact, there are narrations that even the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam sometimes had terrible thoughts. And there's narrations where they came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam eventually and told him about some of these thoughts, and they had preferred to be buried in the ground than to have these thoughts. And the Prophet said to them, "Did you find them? Did you have these thoughts?" Right? And they acknowledged yes. And then when they said that they disliked him, the Prophet said, "That's sarih al-iman. That is pure faith to dislike these thoughts." So we cannot control the type of thoughts that come to us. And that thoughts can be from an angel, or thoughts can be from our nafs, our ego, or thoughts can be from shaitan, from the devil. And shaitan is like an enemy who is waiting for the opportunity to fire. He's like a sniper, right? He's got his bow ready to go. And as soon as you're vulnerable, wow, right? He gets you. He knows, he circulates in us like blood. He knows our vulnerabilities because of what our nafs allows him to know. Your nafs is like the internal spy that lets him know what door or gate to enter from. So I'm saying all of that to say is that this is a part of the human condition. We get thoughts like this. And the key is to understand is that if it's a bad thought, that's not you. Don't fall into the trap of shaitan, which is he wants to convince you are your thoughts. He wants to convince you that the fact that you had a bad thought means that you're a bad person. So the number one thing that you can do and should do is just to turn away from the thoughts. In other words, that to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognize that's an evil thought. That's from shaitan. That's not from me. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. La ilaha illallah. And there's in psychology what they call intrusive thoughts. And it is the same way that you treat them is the same way that you treat these types of thoughts in relation to the Islamic version of psychology, which is the science of tasawwuf. It's turning away from them. They teach you with intrusive thoughts is that the more you obsess over them and think of them, the more you argue back with those thoughts, the deeper that they get. So sometimes like you want to wrestle with your thoughts and then it just leaves you tired and you get a worse thought and then you're wrestling constantly. The best thing is to step back, to know that thought is from shaitan. And the fact that you dislike it or even asking the question indicates that you have iman, as the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba. And then step back and just remember Allah and don't engage the thought. And then the more you preoccupy yourself with good and acts of goodness and put everything in its proper place and understand your deen and how to have times where you do different things among it worship, but among it other things, then the thoughts will eventually go away. The more dhikr that you make, the more dedication to the deen, connection to the shuyukh, the more that these thoughts just dissipate and eventually go away.
And Sheikh, may Allah make it easy for all of us. I mean, and ease all of our burdens, and mental and physical. I mean, along that same note, another sister asked, "Dear Sheikh, when reciting the Quran, when it gets so heavy that one feels like stopping, is that a sign of weak nafs, a demon at play?"
So when she says when it gets so heavy, meaning like the meanings are very heavy upon her, or that in terms of like the actual recitation itself. Okay.
Yes,
So if
for her to clarify, inshallah.
huh?
We can wait for her to clarify, or I think just both
So
perspectives might be
if
helpful.
she means by that like it's just so hard to recite, meaning that it's heavy to go through the process. Because some people it's like that, right? They get really frustrated And that especially for converts that are learning, or people that didn't learn how to recite when they're young, it's hard, right? It's difficult. And okay, so she clarified their actual recitation. Um, then what you want to do is to have a set period of time that you recite Quran every day. So let's just take that 30-minute mark. And you might be able to recite one page. You can only recite one page. But if you keep consistent, that in a short period of time, you'll be able to recite 2 pages, and then 3 pages, and then 4 pages, right? And one of the things that you can do to help yourself is to find a good reciter that recites at a good pace, that you can emulate them. So the reciter is going, and you try your best to follow them, okay? And one of the things Shaitan tries to do is that when we first start learning, is he makes us obsessed over reciting perfectly. You're going to make mistakes, right? Our Prophet ﷺ indicated in the hadith is that the one who's learning وَيُتَأْتَأْ fil Quran, yani, and that is stuttering and makes mistakes because they're still learning how to connect letters and so forth and so on, to connect words with other words, is that these mistakes that we make are forgiven because we're in the process of learning. So we should know that. And sometimes Shaitan puts so much pressure on us that it becomes heavy because we're so worried about making a mistake. Allah Ta'ala is not going to take you into account for striving to learn his book. You don't become a reader overnight. It takes time. And that those mistakes, you don't intentionally make a mistake, but you do your best to recite properly, and that you learn from someone in person that someone else has good recitation, and then over time your recitation becomes better. So don't be obsessed with that reciting perfectly, because that can become very heavy, and then we end up stopping. So those are just a few pointers that I would say there, and inshallah ta'ala over time that we'll get better and better bidnillahi ta'ala. And then if it was for the other meaning, which is in terms of the meanings, is that this is why we have narrations, La ilaha illallah, where there are people who had spent an entire night on one verse of the Quran. That our Prophet ﷺ was known to have spent the entire night reciting, In tu'adhibhum fa'innahum ibaduk. If you punish them, then indeed they're your servants. That he would just keep reciting this over and over and over again. There was another one of the great Imams who kept reciting the words of Allah Ta'ala, Inna ladina amanu wa amilu salihati sayaj'alu lahumur rahmanu wudda. On those who believe and do righteous deeds, the All-Merciful shall bestow love. And he kept reciting this verse, reciting this verse, reciting this verse. And so sometimes the meanings can become very heavy when we think about their implications. The reality of punishment, and that's a very heavy meaning. So Allah Ta'ala bless us to be from those who recite Allah Ta'ala's book with reflection and contemplation in a way that is pleasing to him. Ya Arhamar Rahim.
One more question, which was more of it's a little bit of a shift in direction. If you have just a few more minutes, is that okay?
Marhaba. I didn't catch the first part which you said there.
I know essentially it's just more of a shift in a topic from the Quran to, you mentioned the Shafi'i madhab, right? So we also know about your conversion story, mashallah. I have had conversations with individuals who don't have a specific madhab, right? And it's not to say that they should or should not, but I wanted to get like your advice on what is the benefit of selecting a madhab or researching madhab and learning about it, and how has it helped you, and how do you think it helps individuals in practicing Islam in a beautiful way?
Sure. My general recommendation to people would be is that to learn your religion from qualified people that you trust, ideally that are in your locale. And this is why they say that the ammi la madhabala is that the common Muslim that doesn't have any particular school. Their school is the one that they ask people questions. And so that this doesn't mean that we don't that encourage people to follow a school, but I just like to start very broadly, and so people don't get confused, is that learn from the most qualified and best people that you can, ideally in your locale, and then secondarily as a band-aid through the internet if you don't have that locally, right? Which part of the way you introduced this program, which I thought was beautiful, is that the programs of Celebrate Mercy that are like, this is like a community for people who don't have a community. is that these are opportunities for people who oftentimes don't have local opportunities, and that some people have local opportunities as well, and they just love the programs that you all put on. But I thought that was a very beautiful way to present that, and that this would be my recommendation. Learn from your local people. The benefit of studying a particular school is that it makes it easier for us to learn the individual rulings. And deriving law directly from the Quran and the Sunnah is that you have to have certain qualifications in order to be able to do that. And it would be impossible for someone who doesn't have those qualifications to do that. Exceedingly difficult. You wouldn't even be able to figure out how to make wudu, let alone all of the other things. So that following a particular school, essentially what you're following is not just Imam Shafi. You're following that centuries of hundreds and in the thousands of some of the greatest scholars and greatest minds of the Ummah of our Prophet ﷺ, who looked at the way Imam Shafi developed a method to derive law from the Quran and the Sunnah, and worked and reworked the proofs that they have for these various positions throughout the centuries. And there's a development in the school over a period of time, just as there's developmental stages in the other schools as well. And so it just makes it a lot easier for us. And just for the Amana Ilmiya, I clarified that it was a Shafi position. And I liked oftentimes not to that mention something unless I'm aware of other positions, just to not make things difficult upon people. Is that the Sharia is not meant to make things difficult upon people, is that it's our Prophet said, Hanifah bin, that sent with the primordial way of ease. And so the Sharia, there is yusr and ease in it. And that the main thing is that we follow qualified scholarship, but following a school makes it easier for you. And so that is the recommendation, so that we can learn one valid methodology, and then recognizing when we follow a particular way that there's other schools as well that have particular ways. The key that we don't want to do is just take the easiest opinion of everything intentionally. That's something the scholars have warned us against, because what kind of deen do we really have? That's why when you follow a school and stick to a particular school, it gives you clarity. And then when there's a need, let alone a necessity, you can take weaker opinions within the school and then even other opinions from the other schools. So it really helps that clarify these matters for us.
Beautiful and wonderfully said, Sheikh. This is why we come to you with these questions.
Right.
Jazakumullah khairan for that wonderful answer. I'm actually going to be taking this segment and then sharing it with the friends that I've had this conversation with. So Jazakumullah khairan for that. We are at time. May I have you make a dua for our community on this blessed Friday, the final Friday, before we let you go?
Inshallah. We'll just recite the Fatiha and the intention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all. Ya Arhamar Rahmeen. All of our family and friends and everyone who requested that we pray for them, Ya Arhamar Rahim, the Ummah of our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. May these days be days of rahmah and mercy. May these days be days of maghfirah and forgiveness. May these days be days, Ya Arhamar Rahim, of shifa and healing for all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us relief, and the Ummah of our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam great relief. Ya Arhamar Rahim, and especially our dear brothers and sisters in Palestine and Gaza, Ya Arhamar Rahim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them relief. Ya Arhamar Rahim, Ya Arhamar Rahim, Ya Arhamar Rahim. Bless them to persevere and bless them to be firm and steadfast, Ya Arhamar Rahim. Ward off from the plots of their enemies, Ya Arhamar Rahim. And in any other place on earth where Muslims are suffering in the Muslim world, or as they're living as minorities, even in the countries in which we are all living. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take care of the Ummah of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and return them unto him subhanahu wa ta'ala in the very best of ways, Ya Arhamar Rahim. May Allah tabarak wa ta'ala give us openings in the Quran and recitation of the Quran, understanding the Quran, and be able to put the Quran into practice in a way that's pleasing subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to spend our lives living its meanings and disseminate them first and foremost with our state before it is that we speak, Ya Arhamar Rahim. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspire us all to do right action, to bless us, Ya Arhamar Rahim, have sound judgment, and to move in degrees of closest to Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be able to reach Laylatul Qadr. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and forgive all of our sins, Ya Arhamar, and change all of our past sins into good deeds. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Al-Fatiha. Ameen.